The night started like any other fall evening in early November. The wind had picked up outside, rattling the branches of the tall oak tree in my front yard. Leaves scraped across the pavement in slow, deliberate patterns, carried by gusts that hinted winter was on the way. I was 17, home alone for the weekend. My parents had gone to visit my grandmother in another state, leaving me in charge of the house while my older sister was away at college. It was supposed to be a weekend of freedom, a break from constant supervision, but as the hours crept deeper into the night, that freedom started to feel more like isolation. I spent the first few hours watching TV in the living room, munching on leftover pizza and texting friends. The house was big enough that when I was alone, the silence could almost swallow me whole. My parents had always joked about how creaky the floors were, how the old plumbing made noises that sounded like footsteps in the dead of night. I didn't think much of it at first, until the creaks and groans started to feel like something more than the house settling. At about 11:30 p.m., I was sitting on the couch scrolling through my phone when the power blinked. The lights flickered off for a split second and then back on. The TV screen briefly went black. I shrugged and figured it was just a neighborhood glitch. The weather had been stormy all day with heavy rain and wind, so it made sense. But when the lights came back, I noticed something unsettling. The front porch light, the one that should have turned on automatically at dusk, was dark. That struck me as odd. I wasn't sure if it had gone out or been shut off. I went to the front door, my bare feet pressing softly on the cold hardwood floor. Peering outside, the porch was cloaked in shadow, the usual warm glow absent. I flicked the switch near the door, but nothing happened. Shrugging, I figured the storm had knocked the bulb loose or blown the fuse. I went back inside, locking the door behind me as a habit. I didn't think much more about it. Around midnight, I started to feel uneasy. I told myself it was just nerves, that being home alone after dark made the house seem bigger and more ominous than it really was. But then I heard it. A faint tapping, slow and steady. It wasn't coming from outside. Not at first, it was from inside the house, somewhere near the kitchen. I froze, holding my breath. The house was supposed to be empty, silent except for the rain hitting the windows and the occasional groan of the old pipes. Tap, tap, tap. 3 soft knocks. I crept toward the hallway, clutching my phone like a lifeline. The lights from the living room barely reached the far end near the kitchen, where the tapping continued. I pressed my ear to the wall, straining to listen. The tapping stopped. A chill ran down my spine. I told myself it must be the wind knocking something loose, or a branch hitting the window. I tried to shake the fear and went back to the living room, turning on every lamp and the overhead lights. Sitting back down, I kept my phone in hand and the door locked tight. Then the power blinked again. The TV went off. The lights flickered. When the lights came back, I noticed my phone's battery was suddenly at 5%, despite being fully charged just an hour before. I plugged it into the charger, anxiety rising. The tapping started again, this time louder and closer. It was coming from the kitchen door that led out to the backyard. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I grabbed the nearest thing, a heavy metal flashlight I kept in the drawer, and edged toward the door. My breath was shallow, my heart hammering in my ears. I peeked through the glass pane. Outside, the backyard was drenched in shadow. The rain had stopped, but the wind still moved the branches like ghostly fingers. Nothing there. But then I heard a different sound. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps on the wet wooden deck. I stepped back, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I dialed 911 with trembling hands. The operator answered calmly. I told her about the tapping, the footsteps, the power flickers. She told me officers were on the way and advised me to stay in a secure place, keep all doors locked, and don't answer the door for anyone. I locked myself in my bedroom, took my phone, and sat on the bed trying to steady my breathing. Minutes later, I heard a knock on the front door. 3 loud, deliberate knocks. I held my breath and didn't move. Then I heard a voice, soft, almost a whisper. "Open up, it's the police." I didn't answer. Instead, I went to the peephole. There was a man in a dark jacket and hat, but his face was obscured by the shadows and the brim of the hat. I felt something deep in my gut warn me not to open that door. The knocking stopped. I heard the crunch of gravel as he walked away. When the police arrived a few minutes later, I described the man and what had happened. They searched the neighborhood but found no one matching that description. They said the man probably left when he saw the cops coming. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever it was had been watching me all night. The next morning, my parents rushed back home, worried after I called them hysterical. They installed new locks, security cameras, and a security system. Even with all the added protection, the feeling of being watched lingered for months. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I still hear tapping on the kitchen door. Story, the end. The night I was home alone is one I'll never forget, and it still haunts me years later. I was 18, just about to start my senior year of high school in a small town in Michigan, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and nothing much ever happens. My parents had left for a weekend trip to Chicago to visit relatives, and my older sister was away at college. I was left in charge of the house on a quiet, dead-end street lined with maple trees that painted the neighborhood with fiery reds and oranges in the fall. It was early October, the air crisp and carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from nearby chimneys. I had the whole weekend to myself, a luxury I hadn't had before. That Friday night, I was looking forward to relaxing, catching up on some video games, and maybe a movie or two. The house was a modest two-story with a basement, a creaky old place my parents had bought years ago. The floors groaned with every step, and the windows rattled faintly with every gust of wind. I always thought it had character, until that night. I remember the day fading into dusk like any other. I did the usual, cleaned up, made some food, and texted my friends a bit. By 9 p.m., I was in the living room, earbuds in, playing a game on my console. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the heater and the clicks and beeps of my game. Around 11:30, I decided to call it a night and headed upstairs to my room. I brushed my teeth, slipped into my pajamas, and turned off the light. My room faced the backyard, with large windows overlooking the trees and the tall fence my dad had put up the summer before. I was scrolling on my phone when I first noticed it. A subtle tapping noise coming from the window. At first, I thought it was just a branch rubbing against the glass in the wind, but the tapping continued, slow and deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. It didn't sound like the wind at all. I paused my scrolling and strained to listen. The house was silent except for the tapping. My heart rate sped up a bit, but I told myself it was nothing. Then I saw a shadow flicker past the window. My breath caught in my throat. I put down the phone and crept closer to the window, heart hammering in my chest. Outside, barely visible in the streetlight glow, was a figure standing just beyond the fence line. I couldn't make out any details, only a tall silhouette standing perfectly still. I blinked, and the figure was gone. I told myself it was my imagination playing tricks. The streetlights sometimes made strange shadows from the trees and bushes, but still, the tapping continued, this time on the front door. I froze. Tap, tap, tap. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. I grabbed my phone and texted my best friend, Sarah. "Someone's outside. I'm scared." I hit send and stood near the staircase, listening. The tapping stopped. I could hear the faint creak of the front door handle being jiggled. Panic set in. Someone was trying to get in. I ran downstairs and locked the door. The house had those old-fashioned deadbolts my dad had installed years ago, double-locked now. I peeked through the peephole, but saw nothing. The street outside was empty. No car, no pedestrian. I called 911, whispering, telling the dispatcher what was happening. She assured me help was on the way and told me to stay inside, lock all the doors, and avoid confrontation. Minutes later, I heard the front door handle jiggle again, harder this time. Then the muffled sound of a voice. "Open up!" "It's me." My body froze. The voice was unfamiliar. I scrambled upstairs and locked myself in my bedroom. I called my parents, but only reached voicemail. The knocking started again, louder, frantic. Tap, tap, tap. Then, the sound of footsteps running away down the street. The police arrived shortly after. 2 officers searched the property and neighborhood, but found no one. I stayed up the entire night, lights on, door locked, phone in hand. The next morning, when my parents returned, I showed them the scratches on the front door frame, the marks where someone had tried to pry the lock. They installed security cameras and reinforced the locks. Weeks later, the local news reported several break-ins in nearby towns, all at houses where no one was home. I still wonder who that figure was, why they knocked, and what might have happened if I hadn't been home that night. Sometimes when the wind taps on my window at night, I can't help but remember. Story the end. Uh, the evening started like any other Friday in early November. The sky outside was darkening quickly, casting a bluish-gray pall over my neighborhood in a quiet suburb of Columbus, Ohio. I was 17, home alone for the first time in a long stretch since my parents had gone to visit my aunt out of state for the weekend. My sister was away at college, so it was just me, the old dog Rufus, and the creaks and sighs of the house settling around me. The house itself was an ordinary two-story brick ranch, built in the 70s, but well-maintained. We had lived there since I was 10. I was never one for big social gatherings or late-night parties, so I was perfectly content to stay in, maybe binge some shows on Netflix and catch up on homework. My parents made sure I had everything I needed: extra groceries, the alarm codes, and emergency contacts, and they said they'd call every night. It felt reassuring at first. That first night, the house was silent except for the occasional hum of the furnace and Rufus breathing at my feet. I sat on the couch, the glow of the TV illuminating my face as I half-watched a documentary about deep-sea creatures. Rufus was curled up on the armrest, his ears twitching occasionally but otherwise calm. Around 10:30 p.m., I heard the first odd sound, a faint knocking from the back door. It was slow and deliberate. Just 3 knocks, spaced a couple of seconds apart. I paused the show and stared at the dark window. I knew the back door was locked. I was sure I had locked every door and window before settling in. Rufus growled low in his throat, a sound I'd never heard from him before. My heart picked up a little, but I told myself it was probably someone messing around. Maybe a neighbor or a prankster. I didn't open the door, of course. I just turned the lights on the porch and glanced out, but no one was there. The street behind the fence was empty. I tried to go back to the show, but the tension in the house was thickening. Then the knocking started again, this time softer, like fingernails tracing wood. I walked cautiously to the kitchen window that looked out onto the backyard. My breath fogged up the glass as I looked out. Nothing. No movement. No shapes. Rufus was pacing now, ears flat, tail twitching. The hair on the back of my neck prickled. That's when the power flickered. The lights dimmed for a second, then went out altogether. I froze. The room was swallowed by darkness. The only light was the muted glow of the TV, and even that flickered. My phone buzzed, a text from my mom. "Call me when you get this." I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer and fumbled to turn it on. The beam was weak but steady. I crept toward the stairs. Every step groaned beneath me. Rufus was at my heels, quiet but alert. The knocking had stopped, but now I heard shuffling sounds from downstairs. Faint but unmistakable. The front door. I froze at the top of the stairs, shining the flashlight down the hall. The faint beam revealed the silhouette of the front door, with the window next to it cracked slightly. I whispered Rufus's name, hoping for some comfort. He growled low again. My phone buzzed again, a call from my mom. I answered in a whisper. "Mom, someone's here. Someone's at the front door." "Call 911, she said immediately. "Stay upstairs. Lock your door. Don't make any noise." I barely got the words out before the sound of the front door handle rattling echoed up the stairs. Whoever it was trying to get in. I backed into my bedroom and locked the door, dropping the deadbolt. The window was closed, but I grabbed the baseball bat under my bed anyway. Rufus was shaking beside me. More noise came from downstairs, soft footsteps pacing the living room. Then a crash, like something heavy thrown against the wall. I heard muffled voices outside, then the pounding of boots on the porch. My phone was dead. No service. The power was out. I was trapped. Suddenly, a loud bang on the front door shook the entire house. Then silence. Minutes passed like hours. I held my breath and listened. Then a scream. Not from me, not from Rufus, but from the dark. The front door slammed open and shut. Then the sound of a car peeling out. I unlocked my door and crept downstairs with the bat raised. The house was a mess. The living room furniture overturned, glass shards on the floor, and a broken window at the front entrance. I called 911 from the landline and stayed on the line until the police arrived. They found muddy footprints inside, signs of forced entry, and evidence someone had been searching the house. They told me it was likely a home invasion attempt, maybe a robbery, but that the intruder fled when he heard the sirens. My parents rushed back the next morning. We installed new locks, an alarm system, and security cameras. Even now, months later, I still jump at the sound of a knock or a creak. I never realized how vulnerable Home Alone really meant until that night. Story the end. The night my parents left town, I was excited and a little nervous to be home alone for the first time in years. I was 22, living in the same house I'd grown up in, just outside a small town in Indiana. My parents had gone to visit family in Chicago for the weekend, and I was supposed to work during the day Saturday, but had the whole night free. I told them I was fine with staying by myself. I'd handled the house before, when they went out for short trips. But this was different. 2 full nights alone, with no one coming by. The house was one of those old mid-century ranch-style homes, with creaky floors and a big yard surrounded by tall trees. It sat near a quiet street with just a few neighbors, most of whom were retirees or couples who kept to themselves. I'd always felt safe there, maybe too safe. The kind of place where you leave your doors unlocked because nothing ever happens. I knew better now. Friday night started out fine. I made myself a frozen pizza and watched some movies. I checked all the locks a dozen times before going to bed around midnight. The house was silent except for the occasional hum of the furnace and the soft ticking of the old wall clock in the kitchen. I fell asleep quickly. I remember waking up around 3:30 a.m. I'd been dreaming, but something felt off. The house was too quiet. No sounds from the street, no cars, no dogs barking, no wind. I could hear my own breathing in the dark. That's when I heard the tapping. Soft, almost rhythmic, coming from the back door. I lay still, heart pounding, eyes wide open in the dark. The tapping stopped. I strained to listen. Then it started again. Tap, 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 3 quick knocks. I swallowed hard and slowly got out of bed. I grabbed my phone but hesitated to use the flashlight. I wasn't sure if it was a branch knocking in the wind or something else. I crept downstairs, careful not to make noise on the creaky steps. The house smelled faintly of the lavender air freshener my mom kept on the kitchen counter. At the back door, I peered out the window. The backyard was pitch black, the moon hidden behind thick clouds. I couldn't see anything but the outlines of trees swaying softly. I unlocked the door just a crack and looked out. No one was there. Then I noticed a small envelope stuck under the door's weather stripping. I fished it out with trembling hands and peeled it open. Inside was a small piece of paper with a message written in messy, hurried handwriting. I'm watching. Don't be alone. My stomach dropped. I backed away from the door and slammed it shut, locking it tightly. I grabbed my parents' old baseball bat from the closet and sat down on the couch, trying to steady my breathing. I called my best friend Mike. He answered groggily. Mike, someone's at my house. I think someone's outside. I found a note on the back door. It says, I'm watching. Don't be alone. What do I do? He told me to call the police right away. I dialed 911, hands shaking. The dispatcher was calm and said officers were nearby and would be there shortly. I turned on every light in the house and stayed near the phone. Minutes felt like hours. I heard footsteps outside, pacing slowly across the back porch. My pulse raced. Then the front doorbell rang once. I didn't answer. After what felt like forever, a police cruiser pulled up. 2 officers knocked on the door and came inside. They searched the house and yard, but found no signs of forced entry or anyone lurking nearby. The officers told me someone might be playing a prank or it could have been an animal. I wasn't convinced. They advised me to keep the doors locked and call if anything else happened. They left, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching. That night, I barely slept. Around 2 a.m., I heard whispering outside my bedroom window. I froze, straining to listen. The words were indistinct, but the voice was low and chilling. I pulled the curtain shut and stayed silent. Then the power flickered and went out. The house was plunged into darkness. My phone's flashlight was my only light source. Suddenly, the front door creaked open. I ran out of my room. I bat raised toward the stairs. No one was there. I locked every door and window again. For the rest of the night, I stayed in the living room, bat in hand, lights on, listening for any sound. Morning finally came. When my parents returned Sunday afternoon, I told them everything. They were shocked and called the police again. They installed a security system the next day. I never stayed home alone after that. The feeling that someone was watching, waiting, never left me. Story the end. The house was unusually quiet that night. A deep, unsettling kind of silence that seemed to press in from all sides. I was home alone for the first time in years. My parents had gone out of town for the weekend, leaving me to watch the place, take care of the dog, and manage on my own. I was 22, a college junior, and thought I was ready for this. After all, the neighborhood was safe, the streets were familiar, and the house had never given me reason to worry before. I settled in for a typical night, cooking dinner and then retreating to my bedroom with my laptop and some music. The dog Max was curled up at my feet, snoring softly. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the branches against the windows. I tried to focus on a paper I had to write, but the sounds gnawed at me. Around 11:30 p.m., Max suddenly stood up, ears perked, staring at the front door. I followed his gaze. That's when I heard it. A faint knock. Just one knock. Then silence. I froze. Thinking it might be a delivery or a neighbor, I cautiously looked through the peephole. Nothing but the empty porch. No car, no footsteps. I cracked the door a bit and called out, "Hello, is someone there?" No reply. I locked the door and pulled the chain shut, heart pounding. Trying to brush it off, I went back to my room, but the feeling that I wasn't alone lingered. Then, from the back of the house, I heard a different noise. The sliding door in the kitchen rattling. My stomach dropped. That door should have been locked tight. I grabbed my phone and tiptoed toward the kitchen. The door was still closed, but I could see faint movement outside through the thin curtains. A shadow darted past. I slammed the curtains shut and locked the door again. I called 911 and told them what I heard. The dispatcher assured me police were en route and told me to stay inside and lock every door and window. I barricaded myself in my bedroom, locking the door behind me, Max whining softly at my feet. Minutes later, I heard sirens outside and flashing blue and red lights reflected in my window. Officers swept the house and yard but found no sign of an intruder. That night, I barely slept. Every noise made me jump. The creak of the floor, the hum of the furnace, even Max's breathing. In the early morning, I saw muddy footprints on the back porch steps. The police took photos and promised to keep patrols frequent while my parents were away. For days after, I checked every lock obsessively and left lights on all night. I don't know who was outside that night or what they wanted, but I'm certain I wasn't alone. Story the end. The night I found myself completely alone in the house was one I'll never forget. Not because anything happened that was flashy or loud, but because of how the quiet slowly twisted into something deeply wrong. I live in a typical American suburb in the Midwest where neighbors keep to themselves, but generally watch out for one another. It was a Friday night in early October, and my parents had gone out of town for a work conference. I was 17, used to staying home alone, but that night felt different from the moment the last car pulled away from the driveway. The house was a standard two-story with white siding and black shutters, sitting on a quiet cul-de-sac. The streetlights flickered on as dusk settled, casting pools of yellow light over the pavement. The wind was crisp, shaking the branches of the big oak tree in the front yard. I had planned on spending the evening watching movies and catching up on homework, but as the house settled into silence, I noticed how much louder every little noise seemed. It started around 9 p.m., when I heard a faint tapping at the front door. I paused my show and listened. The tapping came again, a slow, methodical knocking. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I hadn't ordered any deliveries. I peeked through the blinds, but saw nothing except the dimly lit street. Probably just the wind, I told myself, but the tapping kept going, low and steady. I ignored it and locked all the doors again. The porch light was on, casting long shadows over the steps. As I walked back to the living room, I heard another noise, this time at the back of the house. A soft scraping, like someone dragging something along the siding. My stomach tightened. I slipped to the kitchen window and looked out, but saw nothing. The backyard was fenced in, but it was easy to imagine someone hiding there. I decided to call my parents to check in, but my phone was dead. Strange. I plugged it into the charger, but no response. I grabbed the cordless landline and dialed their numbers, but all went straight to voicemail. Then the power flickered, and the house went dark for a few seconds before the lights came back on. My heart pounded. Trying to keep calm, I grabbed a flashlight and a kitchen knife and locked myself in my bedroom upstairs. I closed the door, double-locked it, and sat down on the bed, listening. The house creaked as it always did, but then I heard footsteps outside my window, slow and deliberate. The footsteps stopped. Then, a faint tapping on the glass. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't know what to do. Should I call 911? I grabbed my phone and tried again. This time the screen lit up, but no signal. The bars disappeared as quickly as they came. I texted my best friend Jake, who lived a few blocks away. "Someone outside. I'm scared. Call the cops." I heard a low whisper outside the window. "Let me in." The voice was guttural, broken, and cruel. It made my skin crawl. I backed away from the window, trying not to make noise, but then my closet door handle rattled. I bolted into the closet, locked the door, and sat in the corner clutching the knife. My phone buzzed again. Jake texting, "Help's on the way. Stay quiet." I heard heavy breathing right outside the closet door. "Sarah," the voice whispered. "I know you're in there." I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to slow my breathing. Minutes passed. The breathing moved away slowly down the hall. Then, loud banging on the front door. I stayed huddled in the closet until I heard flashing lights and police sirens outside. When the officers arrived, they found a man hiding behind the bushes near the back door. He was dirty, smelled of alcohol, and had a crowbar. The officers told me he'd been watching the house for weeks, waiting for an opportunity. I spent the night at Jake's, unable to sleep. For weeks, I double-checked every lock and never felt truly safe again. Story, the end. The night my parents left town, I thought I had everything under control. I was 19 and had been home alone plenty of times before. Weekends, evenings, even whole weeks during summer break. But that night, something felt different from the moment I turned the last lock on the door and waved goodbye to them as they pulled out of the driveway. The house was an old two-story in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Illinois. It wasn't fancy or big, but it was home, a place I'd lived in for most of my life. My parents trusted me, and I usually felt safe enough here, but that night the air hung heavy and still, like the calm before a storm. It was late October, and the crisp autumn breeze rustled dead leaves against the windows. I started the night with some dinner I made myself, frozen pizza, nothing fancy. The house was silent except for the hum of the microwave and the occasional creak of the old floorboards. I settled onto the couch with my laptop to catch up on some shows and planned to call it an early night. But as the evening wore on, a growing sense of unease crept in. I kept hearing noises, soft tapping, scratching sounds, footsteps in rooms that should have been empty. Around 9:30 p.m., the power flickered once, then went out entirely. The house was plunged into darkness. I froze for a moment, then fumbled for my phone to use as a flashlight. I went to check the circuit breaker in the basement, but something stopped me from going downstairs alone. Instead, I lit some candles and sat in the living room. As the night wore on, I started hearing things more clearly. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the stairs, the creak of the front door opening and closing, whispers just out of earshot. I called my parents, but their phones went straight to voicemail. I texted my sister, but she didn't reply. My own phone's battery was draining fast, and I wasn't getting any signal to call for help. I barricaded myself in my bedroom, locking the door and pushing a heavy dresser in front of it. From the window, I saw a shadow moving outside, a figure standing just beyond the porch light. I could feel eyes watching me, waiting. My breath caught in my throat. Then the knocking started. Slow, heavy, deliberate knocks at my bedroom door. I stayed perfectly still, holding my breath, then bloody, clutching my phone like a lifeline. The knocking stopped, then started again, louder this time. I dialed 911 on my phone, praying for a connection. The call went through. I whispered my address, but the line crackled and went dead. I tried again, but no signal. The knocking turned into pounding. Suddenly, the doorknob began to turn. I screamed and pushed the dresser harder. The door shook violently. I grabbed the baseball bat under my bed and prepared for the worst. Then, silence. The pounding stopped. I waited, trembling, for what felt like hours until the first signs of dawn crept through the window. When my parents returned the next day, the police came to investigate. They found muddy footprints on the porch and scratch marks on the doorframe. No sign of who or what had been there. I never spent another night alone in that house. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear the knocking. Story the end. The night I was home alone, everything seemed perfectly normal, until it wasn't. I was 17, living with my parents in a modest two-story house on the outskirts of a quiet town in Michigan. My parents had to leave for a weekend trip, visiting family out of state, and I was left to keep the house to myself. I'd been alone before, but this was the first time for an entire night. I was excited, honestly. No rules, no curfew, just me and the silence. The evening started just like any other. I had finished my homework early, made myself some pasta, and settled on the couch with a movie playing. The sky was clear, and the air outside held that crisp chill of early fall, leaves rustling on the driveway. The clock ticked past 9 when I first noticed the strange sensation, like I was being watched. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just nerves. I locked the doors and windows again, double-checked the back door light, and settled back down. But then I heard it, a soft tapping on the living room window. I froze, heart hammering, and looked over. Nothing but the empty street outside, shadows dancing beneath the porch light. Minutes later, the tapping returned, louder this time. I tiptoed over, pulled back the curtain, and stared out. The driveway was empty, silent. I exhaled slowly, thinking maybe it was a branch caught in the wind. Still, a knot of unease formed in my stomach. About 10 o'clock, the power flickered and went out, plunging the house into darkness. My phone's screen lit up my face as I grabbed it from the coffee table. I called my mom, but it went straight to voicemail. Tried my dad. Same thing. I texted my sister, hoping for some company, but she didn't respond. Suddenly, from the basement, I heard a creak. Not the usual house settling noises. The creak of the basement door opening slowly, the scrape of footsteps on the stairs. I gripped the couch armrest, frozen. I knew I'd locked that door. My mind raced. Was someone inside? I pulled the flashlight app up and crept toward the basement door, bat in hand. I cracked it open a bit and shone the light down. Empty stairs, dark and silent. Then a whisper, almost inaudible, echoed up from the depths. Leave. I slammed the door shut, heart pounding like a drum. I ran back upstairs, locked every door and window I could reach, and called 911. The call connected, and I whispered my address. The dispatcher told me officers were on the way and to stay quiet. Seconds later, I heard footsteps on the porch. Heavy, deliberate. The front doorbell rang nonstop. I held my breath, clutching the bat. The doorknob rattled violently. I stayed in the dark, silent, waiting for the police. After what felt like forever, flashing red and blue lights lit the windows. Officers rushed inside, sweeping the house. No one was found. They said maybe someone had been casing the place and fled when they saw the lights. I didn't sleep that night. Years later, sometimes when I'm alone, I swear I still hear that tapping on the window. Story the end. The night my parents left town, I was 17 and home alone for the first time in months. It was early November in a small town in Pennsylvania, the kind of place where every streetlight casts long shadows and the wind whistles through bare tree branches. My parents had gone to visit my aunt in Pittsburgh for the weekend, and my younger sister was spending the night at a friend's house. The house was a modest two-story brick home on a quiet cul-de-sac surrounded by yards thick with fallen leaves. I was excited at first, free to do whatever I wanted without nagging parents or noisy siblings. I ordered pizza, binge-watched a new series, and tried to ignore the odd creaks and groans the house made as it settled into the cold night. But as the evening wore on, a creeping feeling of unease settled over me, subtle but impossible to shake. Around 10 p.m., the power flickered once and then went out entirely. The house plunged into darkness, except for the dim glow of street lamps outside. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, my heartbeat quickening. I decided to check the circuit breaker in the basement, thinking it might just be a blown fuse. Walking down the stairs, I noticed the silence was different, thicker, heavier. The usual sounds of pipes and settling wood were gone, replaced by an oppressive stillness. As I reached the basement door, I heard it. Soft footsteps, deliberate, pacing slowly somewhere above me. I froze. The basement light switch was just a flick away, but I hesitated. Then the footsteps stopped. I bolted up the stairs and locked the basement door behind me, feeling the walls close in. That's when I realized the back door was unlocked, a door I was sure I had locked earlier. My mind raced. Had someone been watching me all evening? Had they slipped inside when I wasn't looking? I grabbed the baseball bat from the closet and moved cautiously through the dark house, calling out softly, "Hello? Is someone there?" The silence answered me back. But then I heard it again, faint shuffling coming from the attic hatch above the hallway. My breath caught. I knew the attic was locked, but I hadn't checked it in weeks. Whoever was in my house had to be hiding there. I called 911, whispering my address, and barricaded myself in my bedroom. I could hear faint noises, creaks, scrapes, the slow shift of weight overhead. Time stretched endlessly as I waited for the police, my heart pounding louder than my breath. When they arrived, the intruder was gone. No sign of forced entry, no footprints outside, just the unlocked back door. Later, I learned that a man had been arrested in a nearby neighborhood, accused of breaking into homes late at night, hiding in attics and basements to avoid detection. I was lucky he hadn't found me. Even now, years later, when I'm home alone and hear a creak or a whisper of wind, I wonder if he's still out there, lurking just beyond the walls. Story, the end. The October night had settled in with a chill that hinted at the approaching winter. Leaves rustled softly outside as the wind whispered through the branches lining the suburban street where I lived, a quiet cul-de-sac tucked just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was 21, back home from my first semester of college, and my parents had left for a weekend trip to visit my aunt, several states away. It was the first time I was truly alone in the house for more than a few hours. And although I'd grown up there, something felt different, heavier. The silence itself seemed louder. Friday evening began like any other. I made myself dinner, watched a few episodes of a show I had been binging, and chatted with a few friends online. The house creaked and groaned in the settling cold. I closed the curtains, locked every door and window, and double-checked them again. I told myself I was being paranoid. The neighborhood was safe, the neighbors friendly, and I had my phone and the security system. Around 11:45 p.m., I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when I heard it, a single, soft knock on the front door. Not the usual heavy pounding of a visitor, but deliberate and slow, almost hesitant. My heart skipped. I peeked through the blinds. Nothing but the dark porch bathed in the glow of the porch light. I waited, but no one came forward. Trying to shake the feeling, I went to the kitchen to get some water. On the way, I noticed the back door was slightly ajar. It shouldn't have been. I was sure I'd locked it before bed. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I closed it and locked it tight. Then, footsteps, soft but unmistakable, echoed on the porch. I rushed to the living room window. Outside, at the edge of the porch light, I saw a shadow retreating into the bushes. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher told me officers were on the way. As I waited, I locked myself in my bedroom, clutching the baseball bat my dad kept under the bed. I could hear the creaks of the house and the occasional snap of twigs outside. The police arrived 15 minutes later. They searched the perimeter, but found no sign of forced entry or footprints, except a few faint marks in the mulch where the shadow had disappeared. They advised me to call them immediately if anything else happened. That night, I hardly slept. Every sound seemed amplified. The hum of the heater, the tick of the clock, the wind tapping at the windows. Around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by the unmistakable sound of glass breaking downstairs. Heart racing, I grabbed my bat and crept toward the stairs. I could hear someone moving in the living room. I retreated back to my room and locked the door, then called the police again, whispering my address. Suddenly, footsteps approached the stairs, slow and deliberate. A shadow appeared outside my door, followed by a low, raspy whisper, "Just come out." I held my breath, waiting until the footsteps retreated. The police arrived moments later, but the intruder was gone. I never found out who it was or what they wanted. From that night on, the house never felt the same. Story, the end. The late October evening had settled over my hometown of Cedar Falls, Iowa, like a quiet blanket of cold. I was 17 then, and my parents had left early Friday morning to attend a funeral for a distant relative in another state. They were only going to be gone the weekend, but that meant I was home alone for the first time in months, maybe ever, with my sister away at college. Our house was an old 2-story wooden frame on a tree-lined street in the older part of town. It had creaky floors and drafty windows. the kind of place that gave off a cozy feeling during the day, but felt unsettling after dark. The streetlights flickered sporadically, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalks. The whole neighborhood was quiet, with most families either gone for the weekend or tucked in early for Halloween. I spent the first few hours like any teenager left to their own devices, watching TV, messing with my phone, and eating cold pizza I'd warmed up earlier. My golden retriever, Max, lay sprawled on the carpet beside me, breathing steadily. The clock ticked toward 10:30 p.m. when the power suddenly flickered and then went out. The room plunged into darkness, except for the faint orange glow of street lamps filtering through the curtains. Max stirred but didn't get up. I sighed and fumbled for my phone to use as a flashlight. Then I heard it, a low, soft thump from downstairs. My heart jolted. I wasn't sure if it had come from the kitchen or the basement, but the sound was definitely real. Max lifted his head, ears twitching. I told myself it was just the old house settling or maybe something knocked over, but the noise came again, this time a little louder. It sounded like footsteps pacing near the back door. I put on my shoes and grabbed a heavy flashlight from the drawer before carefully making my way downstairs. The silence of the house felt overwhelming, every creak amplified. The back door was locked tight, but the screen door was slightly open. That wasn't right. I always made sure it was latched. A cold breeze blew in as I nudged it shut and locked it properly. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor, Lisa. "Hey, saw someone lurking around your backyard earlier. Thought you should know." My blood ran cold. I locked the door again and backed away, listening. A faint scraping noise came from the basement door, like someone was trying to pry it open. I gripped the flashlight tight and called 911 on my cell. The operator told me officers were en route and instructed me to stay upstairs and lock all doors. I bolted back upstairs and locked my bedroom door, dragging a chair against it. Max was whining now, and I hugged him close, barely breathing. Then I heard footsteps on the porch, heavy and slow. They were coming inside. I shone the flashlight toward the window. A shadow passed by. My phone's screen lit up with a new message. "Stay safe. Police are 5 minutes out." The footsteps stopped outside my window. Then I heard a whispered voice, chilling in the dark. "Let me in." My knees buckled. The chair scraped loudly on the floor. The doorknob rattled violently. I screamed and called for help. The police sirens pierced the night just as the door burst open. They found muddy footprints inside and an open basement door, but no sign of the intruder. My parents came home the next day, and we changed all the locks and added new alarms. But even now, I still feel uneasy when I'm home alone at night. Sometimes I swear I still hear the scraping at the basement door. Story the end. The night my parents left town and I was home alone started out like any other. I was 17, a senior in high school, and my parents had to attend a conference in another state. They insisted I'd be fine, and honestly, I was looking forward to some quiet time by myself. The house was our typical suburban home in Michigan, a two-story with a big porch, a fenced backyard, and neighbors who kept to themselves but were friendly enough. They left around mid-afternoon, and I waved goodbye from the front steps. "Lock up tight," my mom said, handing me their cell phones and the keys. "Don't open the door for anyone. Call us if you need anything." "I will," I said, confident and excited. Once the car pulled away, the house felt different, empty and too quiet. I spent the first few hours tidying up, doing laundry, and catching up on homework. At around 7 p.m., I made myself dinner, microwaved mac and cheese, and plopped down on the couch to watch a movie. The living room was dimly lit with the TV flickering in front of me, and the windows showed nothing but the darkening street outside. I remember noticing the quiet, not just the usual house creaks or the hum of the fridge, but a stillness that felt unnatural. Then, just as the movie hit a suspenseful moment, I heard a tapping noise coming from the front door. At first, I thought it was the wind or maybe a branch brushing the window, but the tapping continued, rhythmic, slow, and deliberate. My heart started to race. I glanced at the clock, 7:15 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I hadn't ordered food or anything. I pulled back the curtains cautiously and looked out. The porch was empty, bathed in the glow of the porch light, but I couldn't see anyone. Trying to stay calm, I texted my best friend Mike, "Weird tapping at the door. No one there." He replied immediately, Probably a branch. Ignore it. I wasn't so sure. I locked the deadbolt, closed the curtains, and tried to return to my movie. But the tapping began again, louder this time. Suddenly, the power flickered and went out, plunging the house into darkness. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike, but the screen dimmed and went black. I was alone in the dark. I grabbed my phone charger, plugged it in, but nothing happened. I reached for the landline phone in the kitchen and dialed 911. The line was dead. A cold wave of fear washed over me. I turned on my flashlight app, feeling its weak beam barely pierce the darkness. Then I heard it. Footsteps on the porch. Slow, heavy, methodical steps. My breath caught in my throat. I ran upstairs and locked my bedroom door, clutching a kitchen knife I had grabbed on the way. From my window, I could see the shadowy figure pacing the porch just beyond the glass. The footsteps stopped. Then came a soft knocking on the window. "Sarah," a hoarse voice whispered. "Let me in." I backed away, heart pounding so loud I thought it would burst. I dialed Mike again, hoping he was still there. "No service," I whispered, tears welling up. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. I crawled into my closet, locked the door, and hid behind some clothes. My phone buzzed. Mike had sent a message. "I'm calling the police now." The closet door handle rattled violently. "Sarah, I know you're in there," the voice hissed. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying not to scream. Minutes felt like hours. Suddenly, flashing red and blue lights flooded the window. The intruder bolted outside. Officers burst through the front door moments later. I ran into their arms, shaking and sobbing. They found a man hiding in the bushes near the back door, covered in dirt and holding a crowbar. He had been watching the house for days, waiting for the right moment. After that night, I never took being home alone for granted. Story, the end. The night my parents left town and I was home alone started out just like any other. I was 17, living in a quiet suburban neighborhood in the Midwest. My parents had to drive down to Chicago for a work conference, leaving me with the house to myself for what was supposed to be 2 nights. They were cautious, made me promise to lock every door and window, to keep my phone close, not to open the door for anyone, and to call them if anything seemed off. They left early Friday evening and the sun was just setting when their car disappeared down the street. At first, the house felt peaceful. I played some music, ate leftovers from dinner, and watched some TV. The quiet was different, though. No distant sounds of my parents moving about, no car doors slamming or the low murmur of their voices. Just me, alone, in a big, familiar space that suddenly felt emptier. Around 9:30 p.m., I was sprawled on the couch scrolling through my phone when I heard a soft knock at the front door. I froze. I told myself it must be the wind or maybe some kid playing a prank, but the knock came again, 3 sharp taps. I wasn't expecting anyone. I told myself to ignore it. Then, as I glanced toward the window by the door, I saw a shadow moving just beyond the porch light's glow. The figure was tall, wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled low. The porch light flickered, making the shadow dance like it was alive. I grabbed my phone and locked the screen. The knocking started again, more urgent this time, and then the doorbell rang. I didn't answer. Instead, I went to check the back door, making sure it was locked. I double-checked every window on the first floor, and then moved to the second floor to check the bedrooms. I tried texting my parents, but their phones went straight to voicemail. The anxiety started to creep in. I decided to call the non-emergency police line to report the stranger outside. They told me an officer would be dispatched to check the area. I sat in the living room with the lights off, trying to remain calm. About 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. I didn't answer. I kept the curtains closed, but through the gap, I could see the silhouette still lingering, pacing back and forth in front of the house. Then the porch light went out. The shadow disappeared. I called the police again. They said officers were on their way and to stay on the line. Suddenly, from the kitchen, I heard the unmistakable sound of the back door sliding open. My heart dropped. I sprinted down the stairs and grabbed the nearest object, a heavy metal pan. I crept toward the kitchen entrance. The sliding door was open, just a crack, and outside the wind blew the screen back and forth. No one was there. Then I heard it, a soft footstep behind me. I spun around like pan, pan, pan. The pan connected with something solid. A man stumbled backward, clutching his head, his face pale in the dim light. I screamed and ran to the phone. The man fled through the open back door, disappearing into the night. Police arrived minutes later. They found muddy footprints throughout the kitchen and living room and an unlocked back window. It turned out the man was a local with a criminal record for burglary. After that night, I never felt completely safe in that house again. I installed security cameras, changed all the locks, and started sleeping with my phone within arm's reach. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls and the house creaks, I swear I can still hear footsteps just outside. Story the end. The house was unusually quiet that night. I was 17, home alone for the first time since my parents left for a weekend trip to visit my aunt in another state. They had driven out early Friday morning, and my older sister had left for college the week before, so it was just me in our suburban house in northern Ohio. I remember feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness, but mostly I was just glad to have the place to myself for a few days. It was early November, and the chill in the air seeped in through the cracks of the old windows, despite the heater humming quietly in the background. I spent most of the day keeping to myself, doing homework, tidying up, and binge-watching some shows. Dinner was a quick microwave meal, and by 9:30 p.m., I was ready for bed. I checked all the doors and windows before heading upstairs, making sure everything was locked. It was a habit I'd always had, but this time, it felt different. More urgent, almost. I crawled into bed, my room overlooking the backyard, fenced in by tall wooden panels. The street was dimly lit by the yellow glow of a single street lamp at the end of the cul-de-sac. The wind howled softly outside, shaking branches against the siding, making the house creak and groan like it was alive. Around midnight, I was awakened by a faint tapping sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, or maybe a branch hitting the window, but the tapping persisted, a slow, rhythmic knocking like someone trying to get my attention. It came from downstairs. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. I grabbed my phone and texted my best friend Sarah, "Hey, I think someone's outside. I keep hearing tapping at the door." No reply. I was alone, truly alone. The taps grew louder, closer, now coming from the back door. I was terrified, but forced myself to get out of bed, clutching the baseball bat I kept under my mattress. As I crept down the stairs, the tapping stopped suddenly. I peeked through the peephole in the back door. Nothing but darkness. I sighed, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. Then I saw it, a shadow moving just beyond the edge of the backyard. I froze. Suddenly, the back porch light flickered on, illuminating the figure. A tall man, wearing a hooded jacket, standing perfectly still, staring right at the door. His face was hidden in shadow. I slammed the door shut and locked it, heart racing. I dialed 911, whispering the situation to the dispatcher. The police promised to send officers right away. Minutes passed like hours. Then, 3 knocks on the front door. I dared not look. The voice of a man called softly, "Open up. It's the police." I didn't answer. After a tense moment, the knocking stopped, and I heard footsteps retreating down the driveway. When the police arrived, they searched the property but found no one. They told me to stay inside, keep the doors locked, and that they would patrol the neighborhood. I didn't sleep that night. In the following days, I noticed subtle signs that someone had been on the property. Footprints in the backyard mud, small scratches near the back door, and that creepy feeling of being watched. I installed security cameras, changed all the locks, and still, the sense of dread never left me. I later learned that the neighborhood had experienced a string of break-ins recently, usually on nights when homes were empty. The experience changed me. I realized how vulnerable I was when alone. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I still hear tapping at the back door. Story the end. The first time I was left alone at our house was supposed to be a normal, uneventful weekend. I was 21, and my parents were heading out of state to visit my aunt for a few days. I begged to stay home alone, feeling confident and ready for the independence that came with being an adult. Our house sat on the edge of a small town in Pennsylvania, a modest 2-story with a big yard and tall trees bordering the property. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other and nothing bad ever happened, or so I thought. Friday afternoon, my parents left early, waving goodbye as they pulled out the driveway. I spent the day cleaning up, doing laundry, and preparing for my weekend of peace and quiet. I was looking forward to catching up on some shows, reading a book, and maybe having a few friends over Saturday night. I locked all the doors and windows as my parents reminded me one last time before leaving, and settled into the couch with a bowl of popcorn by evening. The night was warm, and I had the windows cracked open to let in the cool night air. The hum of cicadas and distant cars on the nearby highway made the house feel peaceful. Around 11 p.m., I was scrolling through my phone when I heard a faint tapping noise. At first, I thought it was a tree branch brushing against the window, but it kept coming. Tap, 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 soft but steady. I glanced toward the back door. It was locked tight and the porch light was on. Curious, I got up and walked over, peering through the glass. The backyard was cloaked in darkness except for the halo of the porch light. Nothing was there, just the empty wooden deck and the shadows of the trees beyond. I told myself it was probably just an animal. Still, I locked the door again and turned on the kitchen light, which shone out the window toward the yard. Back on the couch, I tried to ignore it, but the tapping started again, this time at the front door. My heart skipped. I slowly walked over, looked out the peephole, but no one was there. Then, on the floor beneath the door, I noticed something, a small envelope taped under the door's edge. I picked it up cautiously and peeled it open. Inside was a note written in messy handwriting, "Don't trust the locks." My hands trembled as I dropped the note. What did that even mean? I grabbed my phone to call my parents, but there was no service. I tried again, but the call wouldn't go through. Confused and growing uneasy, I texted my best friend Matt, telling him what was happening. He replied almost immediately, telling me to stay inside and call the police if anything felt wrong. I dialed 911. The operator answered promptly, and I explained the situation. She assured me officers were nearby and would come to check the house. Minutes later, I heard the crunch of tires and a flashlight beam moving through the yard outside. The officers rang the doorbell, and I let them in. They swept the house and the perimeter, but found nothing unusual. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, and no suspicious people. They chalked it up to a prank or a loose branch. I felt relieved, but still anxious. The officers advised me to keep all doors locked and keep my phone handy. I thanked them and closed the door behind them, bolting it securely. Around 2 a.m., the house plunged into darkness. The power had gone out. I fumbled for my phone flashlight and lit every candle I could find, setting them on the coffee table. Suddenly, the front door handle rattled. My heart pounded as I backed away, gripping the baseball bat my dad kept by the door. The handle stopped moving. Then a slow, deliberate knocking began. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks again. I called out, "Who's there?" No answer. I tried to call 911 again, but the phone showed no signal. Then, from the basement door across the hall, I heard footsteps ascending. I held my breath. The basement door creaked open just a few inches. A shadow moved inside the dim hallway light. I screamed, swinging the bat wildly, but no one was there. I ran to my bedroom, locked the door, and texted Matt, begging for him to call the police. My phone buzzed with a message. "Can't reach them. Stay calm." Minutes dragged on like hours. I sat on the bed, bat beside me, staring at the locked door. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the back door. The house seemed to tremble. I heard footsteps rushing down the stairs, and then silence. I stayed awake all night, too terrified to sleep. When morning came, I cautiously opened my bedroom door. The house was empty and silent. All doors and windows were still locked. But on the kitchen counter lay another note, written in the same handwriting, "You're not alone." I packed a bag and left immediately, calling my parents on the way. They rushed home and called the police again. The officers took my report seriously this time, but found no evidence of an intruder. The feeling of being watched lingered long after. I never stayed home alone again. Story the end. The night my parents left for the weekend, I was excited at first. Finally, the house was all mine. I was 21, a college junior home for spring break, and my parents were visiting family about 3 hours away. I'd stayed home alone before, but never for this long. The house was a typical suburban home in Ohio, set on a quiet street lined with maple trees whose leaves were just beginning to turn. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary as I prepared for the weekend. The first night was peaceful. I cooked dinner, caught up on some homework, and watched movies until I drifted off on the couch. The house settled into the kind of silence you only get when no one else is around, just the occasional creak of settling wood or the hum of the refrigerator. But the second night changed everything. Around 11:30 p.m., I was lying in bed scrolling on my phone when I heard a faint noise from downstairs. A soft tapping sound, like fingers lightly knocking on glass. I paused, heart suddenly racing. The house was supposed to be empty except for me and our old golden retriever, Max, who was snoring in his bed near the living room. I told myself it was probably the wind against a window or maybe a branch brushing the glass. But the tapping came again, steady and deliberate, coming from the back door's glass pane. I got out of bed slowly, trying not to make noise, and crept toward the living room. The hallway was dark, lit only by the pale glow of streetlights filtering through the curtains. Max stirred but didn't get up. Peeking through the curtain beside the back door, I saw nothing but shadows and the dim outline of the backyard. No movement, no sign of anyone. I locked the door tightly and turned on all the lights downstairs. I called my parents but went straight to voicemail, which wasn't unusual this late. I debated calling the police but figured I might be overreacting. Trying to shake off the unease, I went back upstairs and locked my bedroom door, leaving a chair wedged under the handle. I sat on my bed, Max curled at my feet, my phone ready to call 911 if needed. About 30 minutes later, I heard it again. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps pacing right beneath my window, on the porch. My heart hammered in my chest as I peeked through the blinds. The porch was empty. Then the doorbell rang. Once, sharply, cutting through the silence. I didn't answer. Minutes later, I heard the back door's handle rattling. I grabbed a kitchen knife and called 911. The dispatcher told me to stay calm and keep the doors locked. I stayed on the line with her while the police rushed to the house. Outside, I heard cars screeching to a stop, shouts and footsteps. Officers burst through the front door and moved quickly to secure the property. After a thorough search, they found footprints in the wet grass by the back door. But no one. No signs of forced entry. They told me someone was likely trying to scare me, maybe hoping to catch me off guard. I spent the rest of the night on the phone with my parents, waiting for them to come home the next day. I still get chills thinking about that night, the feeling of being watched, the sound of footsteps where no one was. It was the first time I truly understood what it meant to be alone in a house. Story the end.